When you reach 72, people assume you've stopped mattering. They nod at your stories without listening. They mistake silence for decay, and they call your patience retirement. I learned that the hard way at my daughter's engagement dinner. The restaurant was loud, full of polished silverware and louder egos. My daughter, Claire, sat beside her fiancé, Ethan Ward, a man who spoke in numbers, not truths. Across the table sat his boss, Mr. Rowan, CEO of a tech firm in Austin, where Ethan worked as a project manager. It was supposed to be a simple evening, a celebration, until it wasn't. Ethan stood, raised his glass, and said, "This is Claire's father, Daniel Hart. He's kind of old school, retired now, basically unemployed, but still full of advice." The table laughed politely. I didn't. Mr. Rowan tilted his head, studying me for a moment before replying, "Unemployed, huh? Then perhaps you've learned the only job that matters, staying useful without being seen." Ethan froze. The laughter died. The silence stretched long enough for truth to walk in. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, finished my drink, and looked at the reflection in the glass. An old man who'd once built something that young men now took credit for. If I mishandled that dinner, I could lose my daughter to a man who mistook arrogance for ambition. So, I decided not to argue. I would let time teach him what manners couldn't. And that was the beginning of my quiet correction. People think aging makes you smaller, quieter, slower, easier to dismiss. But the truth is, it only sharpens your ability to see who's pretending. When the noise of ambition fades, you start hearing the hum of authenticity. I'd spent my life building things that made noise, companies, systems, inventions. And when I finally walked away from all of it, I promised myself I'd learn to enjoy silence. It took me years to understand that silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the sound of everything else being irrelevant. My name is Daniel Hart. I'm 72, widowed for almost a decade, and officially retired. A word people like to use when they can't imagine doing anything that doesn't pay them back. I live in a small town outside Austin, Texas, in the same house my wife, Marianne, designed before she passed. It's quiet here. The mornings smell of cedar and rain. The air shifts with the sound of cicadas, and the world feels wide enough to forget what it owes you. I tend to the garden, fix what's broken, and read the newspaper like it still matters. Some days it does. My daughter, Claire, visits when she can. She's 32, a journalist, stubborn in all the right ways, gentle in all the wrong ones. She inherited her mother's eyes and my habit of staring at people too long before answering. For the last 2 years, she's been with a man named Ethan Ward, tall, polished, ambitious. He has a handshake like a politician and a smile that feels rehearsed. Claire loves him because he dreams big. I tolerate him because I know that dreams built on ego tend to collapse on schedule. The first time I met Ethan, he came to the house with a bottle of overpriced wine and the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. He called me sir twice too many times and spent the rest of dinner explaining how my generation had built the foundation, but missed the future. I didn't argue. I've learned not to correct men who believe they're inventing time. When he left, Claire hugged me and whispered, "He's just nervous." I told her, "That's fine. But nervous people don't usually talk that much." Still, I wanted her happy. Parents spend their lives giving children tools they might never use. Wisdom, discipline, empathy. They're only useful if the next generation believes they still apply. Claire believed in love, and I believed in letting her find out what kind it was. After Marianne died, I sold most of my shares in Omnivex Systems, the tech company I co-founded in the 1980s, and kept a quiet minority stake. I didn't need the money. I needed the distance. Watching the company grow without me was like seeing a child outgrow your advice. Every once in a while, my old partner, Henry Lowell, would call to update me. They're still using your code. Dan, he'd say. Half the backbone of the new system is still yours. I'd laugh and tell him, then at least something I built still listens. A few months before the engagement dinner, Claire stopped by with wedding magazines and that look daughters get when they've already made up their minds. Ethan wants to do something big, she said. He's inviting his boss, Mr. Rowan. It's going to be beautiful. I smiled and said, big and beautiful don't always fit in the same sentence. She laughed. You'll like him. He's respectful. Ethan? I asked. No, Mr. Rowan, she said. Ethan respects people who have more money than him. Mr. Rowan respects people who have more history. The night before the dinner, I found myself polishing my shoes longer than necessary. Old habits die in silence. I thought about Marianne. She had always handled people like Ethan effortlessly, charm first, truth second, punishment optional. She used to say, some people mistake decency for dullness. Let them. They'll talk louder than they think, and you'll hear everything you need. I missed her clarity. When I arrived at the restaurant, Claire's smile was the first thing I saw. It made the rest of the evening worth enduring. She looked radiant, glowing in that fragile way only people who still believe the world is fair can glow. Ethan was everywhere, shaking hands, directing waiters, introducing himself like he was running for office. His suit was too new, his watch too loud, his ambition too visible. I could tell he'd rehearsed this dinner like a presentation. He greeted me with a hug too tight for sincerity. Dan, so glad you could make it. You invited me, I said. He laughed awkwardly. Right, of course. I meant, we're honored. The word we carried the weight of someone trying to belong somewhere. We sat, we ordered, we toasted. Mr. Rowan arrived last, calm, older, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to own the room. The conversation flowed until it didn't. Ethan lifted his glass and made the mistake that would echo for the rest of the night. This is Claire's father, he said. Daniel Hart. Retired now, but still full of advice. Basically unemployed. But we love him. The table chuckled politely, unaware that they'd just drawn a line they couldn't erase. Mr. Rowan glanced at me, a hint of recognition in his eyes. Unemployed, huh? He said. That must be nice. Some of us are still working for what men like you already finished. Ethan laughed uncertainly, not realizing he'd been corrected in public language. I didn't laugh. I just watched the scene unfold. My daughter's fiancé shrinking in front of a man who knew the weight of history. The rest of the evening continued in fragments, forced smiles, careful jokes, a dinner that ended without dessert. I left without saying much. Back home, I poured a drink and sat by the window. The rain had started, steady and slow. The world outside was dark, but the reflection in the glass wasn't. It was me, older, quieter, but still capable of something I'd almost forgotten. Precision. Ethan had made his move. I would make mine. Not to humiliate him, to educate him. Some lessons, I've learned, only stick when they cost something. The next morning, I called Henry. He answered with his usual half grin in his voice. Let me guess, he said. You finally met the boy. I did, I replied. And? He's working for Rowan, isn't he? He is. Henry sighed. That explains the arrogance. He's been in charge of a department he doesn't understand, trying to prove the new generation can clean out the old. And how's that working for him? I asked. Poorly, Henry said. They've lost 3 senior engineers and a patent lead in 2 months. Rowan's furious. I leaned back in my chair. Good. That means he's paying attention. Dan, Henry said, lowering his voice. You're not thinking of… I'm thinking of nothing, I interrupted. Just considering what happens when a man confuses leadership with noise. He laughed softly. That's the Dan I remember. No, I said. That Dan's gone. This one's quieter, but he listens better. After the call, I went into the garage and opened an old drawer. Inside were my cufflinks, silver, simple, engraved with the original Omnivex logo. Marianne had them made after our first successful launch. I hadn't worn them in years. I polished them until I could see my face in them again. Older, yes, but steadier too. That night, I wrote a note on the back of an envelope. Silence isn't surrender. It's surveillance. Then I folded it and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The world thought I'd retired. Maybe I had. But purpose doesn't need a paycheck, and respect doesn't renew itself. The next chapter, as I would soon find out, wasn't about revenge. It was about balance and the quiet, deliberate art of correction. A week after that dinner, Claire called. Her voice was careful, soft in the way people sound when they're afraid of the answer they'll get. He didn't mean it, Dad, she said. He was nervous. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. You don't have to explain him to me, Claire. He already did that himself. She sighed. He's just different around people he wants to impress. Then maybe he should pick better people, I said. She didn't reply for a few seconds. Please, just come to the wedding. Don't make this harder than it already is. I'll be there, I said. That's what fathers do. We show up, even when we've already been dismissed. When the call ended, I sat for a long time in the quiet. The house had a way of magnifying absence. Every room still carried Marianne's handwriting somewhere. Every chair remembered where she used to sit. Silence, I'd learned, doesn't forget. It just waits for you to listen again. I poured another coffee and walked out to the porch. The sky was overcast, the kind that smelled of rain but refused to deliver it. Across the fence line, the neighbor's kid was fixing his old pickup, cursing under his breath every few seconds. He reminded me of myself at 20, certain the world could be rebuilt if you just hit it hard enough. Later that afternoon, I got an email from Henry. Subject line: You'll love this. Inside was a link to a press release from Omnivex Systems. I opened it and read, Project Horizon, a new era of efficiency and modernization. The accompanying photo showed Ethan Ward standing beside Rowan, shaking hands for the camera. The caption read, Led by the next generation of innovation. I couldn't help but laugh. Innovation is a polite word for erasure when it's used by men who don't know what they're replacing. I scrolled down to the fine print. The project aimed to optimize workforce output by phasing out outdated operational roles. In simpler terms, they were firing people who remembered how the system actually worked. I called Henry that evening. They're calling it Project Horizon, I said. Catchy, he replied. Means they can't see what's right in front of them. You still in contact with Rowan? I asked. Occasionally. Why? Just wondering if he still values results more than noise. Henry chuckled. He does, but he's tired. You know how it is when you spend decades cleaning up after idealists. Yes, I said. I used to hire them. He laughed, then went quiet. Dan, are you thinking of stepping in? No, I said. Just thinking of standing still in the right place. That's more dangerous, he said. I know. The next day, Ethan showed up at my house. No warning, no call, just the sound of his shiny black car crunching down my gravel driveway. He got out, wearing a suit too expensive for sincerity. Mr. Hart, he said, smiling like he'd practiced it in the mirror. Just thought I'd stop by. Wanted to make things right. You didn't break anything, I said. You just revealed how fragile it already was. He laughed, pretending to take it lightly. You know, Claire told me you were sharp. Guess she wasn't exaggerating. She usually isn't, I said. Coffee? Sure, he said, stepping inside. He looked around the house like he was scanning a museum. You've got a real vintage vibe going on here. Very authentic. I almost smiled. Authenticity, to him, was an aesthetic, not a virtue. How's work? I asked. Crazy, he said. Rowan's pushing us hard. We're restructuring, trying to bring the company into the 21st century. And what does that mean? I asked. Cutting the fat, he said. No offense. None taken, I said. Though you might find muscle under what you're calling fat. He didn't catch it. Or maybe he did, but pride makes poor listeners. He started giving me advice on posture, on networking, on how to present better when meeting people of influence. First impressions are everything, he said. You've got to own the room. Speak first. Make eye contact. Smile like you know something they don't. I nodded, pretending to take notes. He believed he was teaching me, not realizing that arrogance often sounds like mentorship to the arrogant. When he left, he shook my hand too tightly again and said, See you at the rehearsal dinner, sir. Looking forward to it, I said. After he drove away, I went into the garage again. The cufflinks were still there, polished, waiting. I placed them inside a small wooden box Marianne had given me on our 10th anniversary. On the lid, she had carved a quote from one of her favorite poets. What's left unsaid teaches longer. I traced the letters with my thumb and smiled. Ethan would soon learn that lesson, even if he didn't know who was teaching it. The following week, Claire came by with wedding plans. She was radiant, stressed, excited, the way people are when they think love will fix what patience won't. She showed me the invitations, the color palette, the menu. I nodded at all the right moments. When she was done, she looked at me with that familiar, half-worried expression. You're not mad, are you? Mad? I said. No, just observant. He really does love me, Dad. I believe that, I said. He just doesn't know what love looks like yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked outside and sat on the porch until the stars started to fade. The air was cold enough to sting, but I didn't mind. Silence is best felt when it bites a little. I thought about the men I'd built Omnivex with, Henry, Rowan, and a few others whose names had faded from press releases but not from my memory. We'd been hungry back then, but not ruthless. We believed innovation and empathy could coexist. Somewhere along the line, ambition had drowned empathy out. And now I was watching it happen all over again through Ethan. The same disease in a younger host. The next morning, I drove into Austin for the first time in months. The city looked different. Glass towers replacing brick, coffee shops where workshops used to be. Progress had gotten louder and less grounded. I stopped by a small cafe near Omnivex's headquarters. Through the window, I could see Rowan stepping out of a car, surrounded by younger executives. He looked older, slower, but his eyes still carried that sharp edge. I didn't go in. Some recognitions work better from a distance. On the way home, I stopped at a hardware store. The young cashier looked at my hands and said, "You build stuff?" I smiled. "I used to." "Cool," he said. "My granddad was a builder. He says everything's easier now. You just click an order." "Then he's lying to make you feel better," I said, and handed him the cash. He laughed awkwardly. Kids these days don't realize humor and truth sometimes share the same expression. That night, I called Henry again. "He came by," I said. "Ethan?" "Yes. Tried to teach me how to shake hands properly." Henry chuckled. "You take notes?" "Mental ones," I said. "How's Rowan?" "Frustrated. Horizon isn't working. They've lost critical data flow. He's blaming mid-level management." "Then he's close to the truth," I said. "Close, but not quite there." Henry paused. "You're not planning anything reckless, are you?" "At my age, Henry," I said, "recklessness just looks like timing." After the call, I wrote another line in my notebook. Some lessons need a stage, but the smartest ones use silence as a spotlight. I underlined it twice. The days leading up to the rehearsal dinner passed quietly. Claire was busy with fittings and floral arrangements. Ethan was busy pretending to be busier. I stayed in the background, invisible on purpose. Old age gives you that luxury. People forget you're watching. On the morning of the dinner, I opened the wooden box again. The cufflinks caught the light, small mirrors of history. I fastened them onto my sleeves, looked at my reflection, and whispered, "Let's see who recognizes you first." The drive to Austin felt shorter this time, maybe because I already knew how the night would go. Some stories don't need rewriting. They just need retelling in the right tone. And mine, tonight, would be quiet, surgical, exact. The restaurant was all glass and gold trim, the kind of place where success pretends to have taste. I arrived early, not because I wanted to, but because people who listen always arrive before the noise does. A hostess greeted me with the rehearsed smile of someone trained to measure wealth in silence. "Mr. Hart," she said, glancing at the reservation list. "The ward party is in the private hall." I thanked her and walked in. The room smelled of confidence, perfume, wine, and the faint panic of people trying too hard to appear comfortable. I found my seat at the far end of the table, half lit, facing everyone but not centered. Perfect. The spot for someone the world assumes is retired. Ethan arrived 20 minutes late, the delay intentional. He wanted to make an entrance. Claire looked beautiful, anxious, glowing in a way that always made me think of Marianne, the same smile that could talk a storm into resting. She kissed my cheek, whispered, "Thank you for coming." And I whispered back, "Thank you for asking." Ethan's eyes flicked across me like a man checking for damage control. "Glad you made it," he said, as if my absence would have been a relief. "So wouldn't miss it," I said. "I like watching young leaders eat dinner." He laughed, not realizing he'd just been included in a study. Mr. Rowan was there too, seated near the head. He noticed me as I sat down. There was a flicker of recognition, not personal, but professional, the way men who've built systems recognize the residue of others who did the same. He nodded politely. I returned it. The evening unfolded in small talk and large egos. Ethan held court, throwing around phrases like next quarter scaling and cross-generational optimization, all while avoiding the one word that mattered most: respect. I watched him use language like scaffolding, to climb, not to connect. When the main course arrived, Rowan leaned slightly toward me. "Daniel Hart," he said. "That name's familiar." I smiled. "It used to mean something at Omnivex." His eyebrow lifted a fraction. "Omnivex, you say?" "Yes," I replied. "Back when innovation meant solving problems instead of renaming them." He gave a quiet laugh, subtle but real. "You were part of that team?" "The first one," I said. Ethan froze mid-sentence, his fork halfway to his mouth. He hadn't known. Claire looked between us, unsure what she'd just stepped into. Rowan nodded thoughtfully. "Then I owe you a thank you," he said. "We're still running on your architecture." "Good to know it's holding up," I said. "Though I hear the new model's lighter on memory." It was an innocent enough sentence to anyone else, but Ethan caught the subtext. His smile faltered. The table continued buzzing, but the current had shifted. People sense hierarchy even when they can't name it. I watched Ethan shrink slightly in posture, recalculating his next line of defense. "Mr. Hart," he said, forcing a smile. "You must have seen a lot of changes in the industry." "Enough to recognize when something isn't change," I said. "Just rotation with better branding." Rowan chuckled. "He's right," he said. "We've been relearning the same lessons for 30 years. That's because forgetting them pays better," I replied. The room quieted for a beat, just long enough for the truth to settle. Claire reached for her glass, trying to lighten the mood. "Dad always talks like he's writing a headline," she said. "It's genetic," I said. "You just publish yours faster." Everyone laughed politely, but the tension didn't dissolve. It only changed color. Ethan's pride was smarting, his mind scrambling for control. Pride hates quiet. It prefers applause. He poured himself another drink and began telling a story about streamlining old frameworks at work. "We're moving into a leaner phase," he said, "cutting redundancy." I watched Rowan's expression flatten slightly. He'd heard enough corporate theater to recognize when it was being performed in his name. "Redundancy," I said softly, "is what keeps bridges from collapsing." He ignored me and kept talking. That's what arrogance does when it meets truth. It raises its voice. Rowan, however, was no longer listening to Ethan. He was watching me. Finally, he said, "Daniel, would you stay after dinner? I'd like to talk shop, if you don't mind." "Not at all," I said. Ethan tried to hide his panic. "Oh, I can brief him, sir," he said quickly. Rowan smiled. "I think I'd rather hear it from someone who built the foundation." After dessert, the others drifted toward the bar, but Rowan and I stayed behind. He lowered his voice. "So, you're the Hart from the original Omnivex team." "One of them," I said. "Henry Lowell did most of the thinking. I just made sure it worked." "That's not what he told me," Rowan said. "He called you the reason Omnivex didn't implode in '97. I smiled faintly. "He's kind. Selectively forgetful, but kind." "Then you must know what's happening with Horizon," Rowan said. "Enough," I replied. It's what happens when people try to edit history for efficiency. He sighed. You're right. I keep thinking maybe arrogance burns itself out, but it keeps finding new hosts. It's not a virus, I said. It's inheritance. People inherit the illusion that progress erases debt. He sat back, thinking, You've still got that quiet sharpness, Dan. It's all I kept, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. You planning to come back? No, I said. But I am planning to stay visible long enough for someone else to learn something. You mean the boy? He asked. Among others. Rowan chuckled. He reminds me of me at 30. Then maybe you should be worried, I said. We both laughed, quietly, the way people laugh when they've both survived the same kind of fire. When I left the restaurant, Ethan was waiting outside near the valet, his hands in his pockets, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. You planned that, he said. Planned what? That thing with Rowan. You knew he'd be there. I read the invitation, I said. You wrote it. You embarrassed me, he hissed. No, I said. You did that yourself. I just gave you good lighting. His jaw tightened. You think you're better than me because you're old. No, I said. Because I'm still learning. You stopped. I started to walk away, but he grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, desperate. You don't know what it's like trying to prove yourself. I looked at him evenly. I know exactly what it's like. The difference is, I wasn't trying to prove myself to people who'd already forgotten how. He let go, staring at me as if waiting for permission to apologize. I didn't give it. Go home, Ethan, I said. Think about what you'd do if someone called your father unemployed at his daughter's wedding. He swallowed hard, then said quietly, I didn't mean it like that. Then maybe it's time you start meaning things properly, I said, and walked away. On the drive home, the city lights blurred into long ribbons of reflection across my windshield. I thought about what Rowan had said, about arrogance being inherited. He wasn't wrong, but inheritance only matters if no one corrects the will. And I had a feeling Rowan would be calling soon, because truth, once reintroduced into a broken system, spreads faster than any press release. At home, I hung up my jacket and looked at the cufflinks in the mirror. The silver caught the kitchen light, bright and steady. Marianne's words echoed in my head. What's left unsaid teaches longer. I whispered back, then let's keep teaching. I didn't know it yet, but that night would be the last time Ethan Ward ever called himself the future without understanding what the past had built beneath his feet. The quiet correction had already begun. 3 days after the dinner, Rowan called. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd slept less than the truth allowed. Dan, he said, I've been thinking about what you said. Horizon's not working. The young team keeps breaking systems they don't understand. They don't know what they inherited, I said. And they won't until it collapses. He exhaled. Would you meet me at headquarters tomorrow? You don't need my advice, I said. You need perspective. I'll bring it. The next morning, the city felt sharper, like the light had found a new way to draw lines around arrogance. Rowan greeted me in the lobby. The place had changed, sleeker, colder, the color of ambition with too much funding. As we walked through the glass corridor, I saw faces I didn't recognize. Young, hurried, carrying laptops like shields. They glanced at me the way people look at furniture that once belonged to someone important. Rowan led me into his office, all chrome and silence. They've been running your old infrastructure with patches on patches, he said. Ethan keeps calling it optimization. That's the problem with efficiency, I said. It's allergic to memory. He smiled faintly. I knew there was a reason I called you. We spent the next hour going through reports. Most of the errors weren't technical. They were human. Shortcuts. Pride. I didn't have to look hard to find Ethan's fingerprints. His name appeared in 3 different memos, each one signed off with buzzwords and missing accountability. He's trying to prove himself, Rowan said. He's trying to disappear everyone who already did, I replied. Rowan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. You know what's ironic? He said. He thinks he's building a new era. He doesn't realize he's just repainting the same old arrogance. That's not irony, I said. That's repetition. Before I left, I handed him a flash drive. What's this? He asked. Something Henry and I worked on before I retired. It fixes what Horizon broke, but it requires humility to implement. Let's see who's capable of that. He nodded slowly. You really never stop teaching, do you? Only when people stop learning, I said, and walked out. That evening, Henry called, already in on the plan. He used it? He asked. Not yet, I said. But he will. People always pick the quiet solution when the loud ones fail. And the boy? He'll hear about it soon enough. The next day, Ethan called me himself. Mr. Hart, he said tightly. Rowan brought you in, didn't he? He invited me, I said. Inviting is what people do when they've realized they need context. You're trying to make me look incompetent. No, I said. You're doing that perfectly on your own. You're interfering in something you don't understand. I almost laughed. Son, I designed what you're trying to fix. There was silence. Then he said, You think you're teaching me a lesson? No, I said. Lessons are for people who attend class. You're about to learn through consequence. The call ended abruptly. Pride always hangs up first. 2 days later, Rowan emailed Henry and me a single line. The patch works. Horizon restructured under new supervision. Attached was a revised internal memo signed not by Ethan, but by Rowan himself. The new directive reinstated every senior engineer the boy had fired. Efficiency, it seemed, had rediscovered its elders. I didn't need to read between the lines. The message was already bold enough. Ethan was finished. Claire came by that night, her voice trembling with confusion. He's been suspended, she said. They said it's just an internal review, but he's devastated. I listened quietly. Sometimes, I said, you have to let the structure collapse before you rebuild it, right? Dad, did you? No, I said. I didn't do anything. The truth just finally had good lighting. She looked at me like she wanted to believe that, and maybe she did. The truth, when timed right, doesn't need to raise its voice. It just waits for arrogance to echo loud enough to expose itself. Later that night, I stood outside, watching the lights from the highway blur against the dark. I thought about Rowan, about Henry, about the countless young men who'd walk through the same glass doors, thinking they were gods of invention. I used to be one of them. The difference was, I had people who told me when I was wrong, and I listened. Ethan didn't have that yet, but he would. The following morning, I received an email from Rowan. Meeting scheduled with Ethan. Would appreciate your presence. I replied, I'll attend, but I won't speak. When I arrived, Ethan was already there. Pale, defensive, small. Rowan sat across from him, calm as a man who'd already decided the outcome. "Ethan," he said, "we reviewed your performance. It seems your department has been running on legacy systems designed by Mr. Hart, systems you claimed to have rebuilt." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I improved them," he said weakly. Rowan shook his head. "You renamed them. There's a difference." Silence filled the room. I said nothing. My silence was a scalpel. It made space for the truth to cut. Finally, Rowan leaned forward. "You're suspended for 60 days. Take the time to decide if you want to learn or just lead without purpose." Ethan glanced at me, eyes burning with humiliation. "Are you satisfied now?" he asked. "No," I said softly. "Satisfaction is emotional. This is educational." He didn't respond. He stood up, nodded stiffly, and left. The door closed behind him with a sound that didn't echo. Endings rarely do. Rowan exhaled and said, "You could have destroyed him." "No," I said. "He's doing that himself. I'm just building a place for him to rebuild." As I left the building, the sunlight caught my cufflinks again. A small flash, almost invisible. The kind of light people mistake for reflection, not realization. But to me, it looked like balance, quiet, steady, exact. The correction had started. The lesson, however, had only just begun. A week passed before Ethan reached out again. I knew he would. People like him always come back, not because they want forgiveness, but because they need validation. Pride and regret share the same doorway. Only humility knows which one to knock on. His email was short. "Can we talk?" I replied. "Yes. Tomorrow. My house." He arrived early, for once. The black car looked less confident sitting in front of my old wooden fence. He stepped out slower than usual, the tailored suit replaced by something simpler, looser. His hair was unkempt, his eyes tired. Life had started teaching him where my words couldn't. I met him at the door. "Coffee?" I asked. "Please," he said, his voice smaller, quieter. We sat in the living room, the same space that had seen joy, grief, and a decade of stillness. I handed him the cup and waited. He stared into it like the answers might float up if he stared long enough. "They've suspended me indefinitely," he said finally. "Rowan says he's reviewing leadership positions. I'm probably done." "Probably," I said. "But done isn't failure. It's feedback." He looked up sharply. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said. "I think it's familiar. I've watched 100 men mistake speed for direction. Most crash where they were never going." He leaned forward. "You don't understand. I worked for this. I earned it." "Earned what?" I asked. "A title? A table seat? Respect?" He hesitated. "All of it." "Then why do you need to convince me?" I said. Silence. I let it sit between us until it started to sting. "When I was your age," I said, "I thought intelligence was a weapon. I used it to win, not to understand. Then I realized understanding outlasts victory. You haven't learned that yet." "I just wanted to prove myself," he said quietly. "To Claire, to Rowan, to everyone." "That's the problem," I said. "You were busy proving instead of becoming." He rubbed his face, sighing. "Rowan told me you gave him the patch. It wasn't mine to give. I said. It belonged to the people you called outdated. They just needed someone to remind the system who wrote the first line of code. He nodded slowly, shame settling into him like a slow cure. You could have ruined me publicly, he said. Why didn't you? Because destruction doesn't educate, I said. Silence does. We sat there for a while, the clock ticking like it had somewhere better to be. Finally, he said, I told Claire everything. She's angry, but not at you. Good, I said. Anger's a stage. It means she's learning to separate disappointment from loyalty. She wants me to apologize, he said. Then do it, I replied. Not to me, to everyone you erased. And mean it. Humility isn't an email. It's repetition. He looked at me, unsure if I was joking. I wasn't. Mr. Hart, he said slowly, you really think people can change? No, I said. I think they can remember what made them worth changing for. He left soon after, quieter than he'd arrived. I watched his car disappear down the road, the dust rising behind him like unfinished sentences. The air felt clean afterward. Some apologies don't need to be spoken directly. They just need to start existing in the same direction as truth. 2 weeks later, I got another call from Rowan. We reinstated the senior staff, he said. Morale's improving. And the boy? He's volunteering to help with the rebuild, Rowan said. On probation, of course. Good, I said. You gave him work instead of punishment. You taught me that, Rowan said. You once told me mercy works better when it keeps people busy. I smiled. Still true. Useless guilt expires fast. That weekend, Claire invited me to dinner. Ethan would be there. I agreed, not because I wanted to see him, but because closure needs witnesses. When I arrived, he greeted me at the door. No overcompensating handshake, no forced charm, just a simple nod. Mr. Hart, he said, thank you for coming. Daniel, I corrected. You've earned first names now. Dinner was quiet, but not tense. Claire smiled more than she had in months. Ethan spoke less, listened more. Progress is rarely dramatic. It's measured in restraint. Afterward, he handed me a letter. I wrote this for you, he said. Read it later. If it's an apology, I said. Don't make it pretty. Pretty doesn't last. It's not, he said. It's acknowledgement. I nodded. That was better. At home, I opened it under the same lamp I used to read Marianne's notes years ago. The handwriting was uneven, honest. You were right. I didn't understand the difference between confidence and arrogance. I confused being heard with being respected. I don't expect forgiveness, just a chance to learn what silence sounds like. I folded it, placed it beside the cufflinks, and whispered, Lesson received. A few days later, Rowan called again. We're hosting a company gathering, he said. Celebrating the rebuild. You should come. Not my crowd anymore, I said. It's your creation, he replied. You deserve the room. I've already had it, I said. Let them build theirs. But I went anyway. Curiosity is the last habit to die. The hall was full. Younger faces, older ones returning, laughter threaded through purpose. When Ethan took the stage to introduce the new initiative, he started with something I didn't expect. Everything you see here was built by people who stayed. And I'm standing here because one of them refused to let me forget what staying looks like. He didn't name me, and I didn't need him to. That's the difference between redemption and reputation. After the applause, Rowan found me near the back. "You proud?" he asked. "No," I said. Relieved. "Why?" "Because the lesson stuck, and I didn't have to raise my voice to teach it." That night, driving home, I realized something Marianne used to say was finally true. The world never remembers who shouted. It remembers who stayed. The boy had stayed long enough, at least, to hear the silence. And I had stayed long enough to know that justice doesn't always sound like a verdict. Sometimes it sounds like quiet breathing in a room that's finally balanced again. By the time the story left the building, I didn't have to move a finger. News travels faster when no one's defending it. Omnivex became the talk of the local business columns. Horizon rebuilt. A new era of accountability. Young executive takes responsibility after internal failure. No one mentioned my name, but everyone mentioned his. The same people who had toasted Ethan's ambition last quarter were now whispering about his necessary humility. That's how justice works in polite society. It doesn't roar. It circulates. I read the articles over coffee each morning, not for satisfaction but for study. Watching a reputation reassemble itself is like watching frost melt. You can't hear it, but the transformation leaves traces. Rowan called twice that week. "The company's stable again," he said. "You should see the numbers. Efficiency up, retention up, morale through the roof." "You don't measure balance with numbers," I said. "But it's good you're looking." "The boy's working like a man possessed," he said. "He shows up early, stays late, speaks less." "Then maybe he's learning," I replied. "People who stop talking usually start hearing." Rowan laughed softly. "You sound like you're enjoying this." "Enjoyment is the wrong word," I said. "Let's call it observation." Claire came by a few evenings later. She'd been quiet since the suspension ended. "He's different," she said. "I don't know if it'll last, but it feels real." "Real is just repetition," I said. "Keep doing something long enough and it becomes character." She looked around the house the way people do when they're checking if time has changed the furniture. "You never say I told you so," she said. "Because I never want to be right that way," I replied. That night, I went for a walk down the gravel road behind my house. The air smelled of cedar and distance. Somewhere far off, a train horn cut through the dark, low, steady, familiar. I used to hear it with Marianne on nights when silence felt too wide. She'd say, "That's the sound of people leaving and arriving at the same time." I didn't understand it then. I do now. Ethan was in that in-between place, not gone, not redeemed, just traveling. 2 weeks later, a journalist reached out asking for a quote. "Mr. Hart," she wrote, "we've heard rumors that you were involved in restoring Omnivex's legacy systems. Can we get a comment?" I replied with one line. "Legacy restores itself when noise stops interrupting it." She never printed it. Too quiet to sell. Henry came by the next morning, carrying 2 cups of coffee and his usual grin. "You always did enjoy teaching the loud ones lessons," he said. "I don't teach," I said. "I just leave space for realization." "Same thing," he said. We sat on the porch, watching the light crawl down the trees. "Rowan wants to host a recognition dinner," he said. "For the old team. You in?" "No," I said. "Let them celebrate continuity. I'll celebrate distance." "You sure?" "Recognitions for the audience. Corrections for the architect." He nodded, understanding. Henry always did. Later that week, I drove into town for groceries. At the cafe near Main Street, two men were discussing Omnivex. "That kid's lucky he didn't get fired," one said. "No," the other replied. "He's lucky someone made him earn his job again." They didn't know I was listening, and I didn't interrupt. That's the beauty of quiet justice. It becomes folklore without witnesses. When I got home, there was a letter in the mailbox. No return address, just my name in careful handwriting. Inside was a note. "You were right. The hardest part isn't falling. It's staying fallen long enough to see why." I didn't need to guess who wrote it. I folded the paper once and placed it next to his first apology. Growth, I've learned, is best measured in handwriting, how it steadies over time. Rowan called again at the end of the month. "We're implementing your architecture company-wide," he said. "And I've reassigned Ethan. Training and mentorship. He'll be working with the same engineers he once called redundant." "Poetic," I said. "Did he resist?" "At first," Rowan admitted. Then he said something that surprised me. He told them, "You can't rebuild what you don't respect." I smiled faintly. "He's quoting me now," I said. "That's how you know the lesson stuck," Rowan replied. That evening, I poured myself a drink and stood by the window. The reflection staring back wasn't younger, but it was lighter somehow, less burdened by the need to be understood. Justice doesn't give peace. It removes noise. The absence of chaos isn't silence. It's music that finally found its rhythm. Claire called later that night. "He wants you to come to the office," she said. "He's giving a presentation next week. Something about legacy ethics." "Legacy ethics," I repeated. "Sounds like he's found a new language for old truths." "He said he wants to dedicate it to you." "Then tell him not to. Quiet lessons don't need monuments." "You'll come, though?" "We'll see." After she hung up, I opened my notebook. The last page still carried my old line. "Silence isn't surrender. It's surveillance." I added a new one beneath it. "Revenge is just correction with better manners." I closed the book and smiled. The fallout was over. The rebuilding had begun. By spring, the noise had settled into something that almost sounded like rhythm again. Omnivex was running smoother than it had in years, and for the first time in a long while, I could feel distance working in my favor. I wasn't part of it anymore, but I didn't need to be. The best systems are the ones that keep functioning after you stop touching them. Henry called one morning, his voice carrying that quiet satisfaction engineers get when the math finally evens out. "It's working," he said. "The rebuild, the mentorship program, everything." "That's good," I said. "Balance likes to be left alone once it finds its footing." "Ethan's the one running it," he added. "You'd hardly recognize him. He listens now." "Listening," I said, "is what separates intelligence from volume." Rowan sent me a letter later that week, written in his slanted script. "We've renamed Project Horizon. It's now the Heart Initiative, a company-wide mentorship fund for engineers over 50. I read the line twice, then folded the letter carefully and placed it beside Marianne's photograph. She would have smiled at the irony. I never wanted my name on anything again, but sometimes justice insists on leaving a signature. The following week, Claire came by, holding a brochure. "They're launching it next month," she said. "He asked me to invite you." "He's learning boundaries," I said. "Good. That means the lesson worked." She smiled softly. "You're proud." "I'm patient," I said. "Pride expires, Patience builds legacy. She laughed. You talk like every sentence needs to be engraved somewhere. It will be, I said, just not where anyone can read it. When the day came, I stood in the back of the conference hall, away from the stage lights, invisible on purpose. Ethan walked up to the microphone, not with swagger this time, but with precision. The hard initiative, he began, isn't about honoring a man. It's about honoring a lesson. That progress means nothing if it forgets who built the road. I watched the audience nod, some clapping, others simply listening. It wasn't applause that mattered. It was understanding. After the speech, he spotted me near the door and gave a small nod. Not gratitude, not apology, acknowledgement. The rarest form of respect. Afterward, Rowan found me by the exit. You didn't stay for the dinner, he said. I prefer exits to encores, I told him. They're quieter. He chuckled. You know, Ethan asked me if he could meet with you again. He wants to thank you properly. Then tell him not to, I said. Gratitude only counts when it isn't performed. Rowan nodded. You really never stop teaching, do you? No, I said. But I stopped grading a long time ago. That night, at home, I went through the letters in my drawer. Ethan's first apology, Rowan's update, the journalist's ignored quote, all the small proofs that truth, given time, always corrects its own course. I thought of Marianne again, of her steady voice and her habit of leaving small notes around the house. One of them still sat inside her old recipe book. Kindness isn't weakness. It's the design of strength. I ran my finger over the fading ink and whispered, still true. A few days later, Claire invited me over for dinner. The house smelled of rosemary and effort. Ethan greeted me at the door, his handshake steady but unforced. Good to see you, Daniel, he said. You too, I replied. I hear you've been busy rebuilding bridges. Trying, he said. Turns out, bridges don't rebuild from the middle. You have to start from the side that still remembers how to stand. That's the correct answer, I said. During dinner, Claire mentioned she was writing a piece for her paper, The Cost of Progress. She looked at Ethan and said, You're part of it. He smiled, then turned to me. I told her she should call it The Price of Forgetting. I nodded slowly. Now you sound like someone who finally understands currency. After they went to bed, I sat on their porch for a while, watching the city lights blur against the horizon. Somewhere, a dog barked, and the air smelled of rain coming late. I took out my notebook and wrote one more line under the last. Justice rebuilds when noise runs out of words. I closed it gently. The next morning, a letter from Omnivex arrived. A simple thank you card signed by 20 engineers I hadn't seen in decades. No ceremony, no title, just signatures and one sentence at the bottom. We still use your lines of code. I held it for a long time. That was legacy, not something you own, but something that keeps functioning without you. Later, Claire called again. He's nervous, she said. About what? About becoming you. I laughed softly. Then he'll do fine. I was nervous my whole life. When I hung up, I stepped outside. The sun was climbing slow, the light cutting through the trees like truth through fog. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. The company was fine, my daughter was happy, and the boy had finally learned the quiet art of standing still. That was enough. The house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that no longer felt like absence but like completion. The spring light spilled through the windows, softer now, landing across the wooden floor in slow, golden lines. I hadn't heard from Rowan in weeks, and that was a good sign. Silence from successful men is the closest thing to peace they ever send. Henry had gone fishing up north, Claire was busy chasing deadlines, and Ethan had started teaching at Omnivex, mentoring the same people he once tried to erase. The symmetry of it all wasn't lost on me. The world had corrected itself without asking for applause. One afternoon, I found myself sitting at the same kitchen table where everything had started. The coffee, the letter, the cufflinks. I opened my notebook to a blank page. It had been weeks since I'd written anything. The lines stared back at me like a mirror that wanted permission to reflect. I began with 4 words. I forgive you, completely. Then I stopped. It felt strange, like trying to write an ending for a story that had already decided to close itself. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't an act. It's a condition you wake up in one day and realize you've already met. I folded the page, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote his name on it. Ethan Ward. I didn't intend to send it. Some letters exist only to release the writer. The paper makes peace so memory doesn't have to. I placed it beside Marianne's photograph on the counter. She was smiling in that way that used to make me believe quiet people knew more than they let on. You were right again, I whispered. Noise never taught anyone anything. That evening, Claire stopped by with a bottle of wine. It's been 6 months, she said. Since the dinner. Can you believe it? Time moves faster after correction, I said. She poured us each a glass and sat across from me. He's different now, Dad. It's not a phase. He's calm, humble. Good, I said. It means the silence stuck. She laughed. You talk about silence like it's a medicine. It is, I said. It just takes longer to swallow. We talked until the bottle was empty. Before leaving, she handed me an envelope. He told me to give you this, she said. I waited until she'd gone to open it. Inside was a single page, his handwriting steadier than before. Thank you for not shouting. I wouldn't have heard you if you did. No signature, no closing line. It didn't need one. I placed it beside mine under the same paperweight. 2 letters, both unsent, both understood. The next morning, I drove out to the edge of town where the old railway cut through the fields. Marianne and I used to come here when she needed quiet, and I needed proof the world still moved. The bench we'd built was still there, worn smooth by weather and time. I sat, the wood cold but steady beneath me, and watched the trains pass. Freight, commuter, the occasional engine alone, all different purposes, same direction. There was something comforting about that. Justice works the same way. It doesn't choose passengers, only movement. I took out my notebook and wrote one final entry. Justice doesn't roar. It remembers. And remembrance, when quiet enough, becomes peace. I closed the book and didn't open it again. The wind moved through the grass, steady, unhurried, carrying the sound of something finished, but not forgotten. When I got home, the light was beginning to fade. I placed the notebook back in its drawer, next to Marianne's letters and the old cufflinks. The silver had dulled a little, the engraving worn smooth. I left it that way. Legacy doesn't need polishing. It just needs to remain visible to the right eyes. Before bed, I stood at the window, looking out across the yard. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. The world outside kept moving, quiet, efficient, exact. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn sounded, low and certain. I smiled. The lesson had outlived the noise. And that, finally, was enough. Morning returned like it always does. Quietly, without permission, without announcement. The sky outside my window was pale and forgiving, and for the first time in years, the silence inside the house didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I made coffee, the smell filling the air like a ritual of continuity. The world had kept moving, and I had finally learned to move with it instead of against it. Claire's article, The Price of Forgetting, had just been published. It was thoughtful, precise, the kind of writing that didn't demand attention but deserved it. She wrote about omnivex, about legacy, about how progress needs memory like a house needs a foundation. She never mentioned me, but I didn't expect her to. True inheritance doesn't need attribution. It lives quietly inside the people who keep its rhythm. I folded the paper and set it aside. Outside, the maple tree in the yard was coming back to life, tiny green buds pushing through where winter had convinced me nothing would grow again. Seasons always keep their promises. They just never tell you when. Later that morning, Ethan called. His voice was calm, unhurried. "We're hosting another mentorship seminar next month," he said. "Would you come?" "You don't need me there," I said. "You've already learned what I would have said." "Maybe," he replied. "But sometimes lessons last longer when the teacher is watching." I smiled. "Then I'll sit in the back, quietly." "I'd expect nothing less," he said. The call ended the way all good conversations should, with understanding instead of closure. I spent the afternoon fixing an old clock that hadn't ticked since Marianne died. It wasn't broken. It was waiting. Most things are. I replaced the battery, adjusted the hands, and listened as it started again. The soft ticking filled the room like a heartbeat you'd forgotten to miss. I looked at her photo on the shelf and said softly, "Still on time." The light shifted across the floor, tracing slow arcs on the walls. The day didn't feel long or short. It just felt complete. Toward evening, I went for a walk down the gravel road that led past the old train tracks. The air smelled of dust and sunlight. I passed the bench where I used to sit with Marianne, the one I'd repaired after the last storm. It was still sturdy, older, but holding. Everything important eventually learns how to hold. I sat for a while, watching the horizon fade into the quiet blue of dusk. A train passed in the distance, its horn low and steady, the kind of sound that belongs equally to departure and arrival. It reminded me of the night Claire was born, how Marianne had said, "Every beginning sounds like something leaving." She was right. All closure is just movement in disguise. As darkness settled, I thought about the people who had filled the years behind me, Rowan, who finally understood leadership wasn't about speaking first, Henry, who never stopped believing in precision, Ethan, who learned that humility travels further than ambition ever could, and Claire, who carried the same calm fire her mother once did. They were all still out there somewhere, moving forward in their own ways, each of them carrying a small fragment of the lesson we had all paid for differently. It wasn't victory, it was balance. And balance, when you finally see it clearly, is the only form of justice that doesn't decay. I walked home under a sky so clear it looked newly invented. The porch light was still on, the house warm against the fading light. Inside, I poured one last cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my notebook. The last entry stared back at me. Justice doesn't roar. It remembers. I read it once more, not to reaffirm it, but to see if I still believed it. I did. The sentence didn't sound like conclusion anymore. It sounded like instruction. Before closing the book, I added one final line beneath it. And remembering is enough. I closed the cover and left it open on the table, not hidden away in drawers or boxes. Some truths deserve the light. The clock on the wall ticked steadily behind me, echoing softly through the room. Outside, the wind shifted, moving through the branches like a slow breath. Somewhere beyond the trees, the train sounded again, fainter this time, but still steady, still sure. I stood by the window, watching the night settle into place, and felt the smallest, most precise kind of peace. The kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that simply arrives and decides to stay. And in that stillness, I understood what Marianne had always meant when she said quiet isn't the end. It's balance. 3 months passed, quiet and measured, the way healed things move. Ethan changed, slowly, but undeniably. He listened now. He let others speak first. He asked questions that didn't exist to impress, but to understand. At Omnivex, they called him Coordinator of Legacy Knowledge, a humble title that carried more weight than any executive one he'd lost. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sometimes the demotion is the promotion. You just have to be wise enough to recognize which direction humility travels. Claire visited one evening, her smile lighter, her words slower. "He's trying, Dad," she said. "And he's different." I nodded. "Then I married a man who can learn," I said. It wasn't praise. It was permission. After she left, I stepped out to the porch. The night was clear, and the light from the house spilled across the yard like a quiet confession. I sat down, the old wood beneath me warm from the day. The cufflinks still caught the glow from the lamp, 2 small mirrors of what time leaves behind when it's done teaching. I turned them in my hand and said softly, "Mercy with receipts. Kind, not soft. The sort of luck a man earns by staying long enough to be accused of having it." The wind carried the words away, and I didn't mind. Some truths don't need to echo. They just need to rest where they were first spoken. And in that silence, I realized what justice truly sounds like. Not a gavel, not applause, not even forgiveness. Just the steady rhythm of a man still here, breathing evenly, after the noise has stopped